For 6 months, she had been the king's secret. A ghost in the palace corridors, a warmth in a bed that had been cold for centuries. Mia existed only in the hushed, velvet dark of the royal wing after the court had retired. She was a rumor whispered by laundresses who found the scent of human soap on the king's linens, a mystery to the guards who were ordered to turn a blind eye to the flicker of a candle in a passage long sealed. To Valerius, the vampire king, she was the single, fragile flame he cupped his hands around, shielding it from a world that would extinguish it without a thought. Tonight, that flame felt bold enough to burn a little brighter. She was curled against him, her head on his chest, the eternal stillness of his body a familiar comfort against her ear. Outside, the autumn wind howled a lonely song around the castle's spires. But here, wrapped in silk sheets and the scent of old books and his cool, clean skin, the world was a universe of two. The fire in the hearth painted flickering gold across the planes of his face, making the shadows in the hollows of his cheeks dance. He was tracing the line of her spine with a single, impossibly gentle finger, his touch a current that hummed just beneath her skin. "The Harvest Moon Festival is in 3 nights," she said, her voice soft. It was not a question, not yet. It was a statement dropped into the quiet, a test. His finger stilled. A subtle shift in the vast stillness of him, but she felt it as if it were a tremor in the earth. "It is," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "The court will be tiresome. You are not missing anything of substance. I heard the musicians practicing in the West Garden this afternoon. It sounded beautiful." She let the image hang between them, the music, the garden, the implied romance of a festival night. For a moment, she saw something flicker in those depths, a longing that mirrored her own. Then the veil dropped. The king returned. "The gardens will be crowded. Every sycophant and schemer from the 7 territories will be there, vying for a moment of royal favor." His tone was dismissive, but it held a new layer of caution, a wall being mortared into place, brick by invisible brick. Mia sat up, the silk sheet pooling around her waist. The firelight caught the earnest hope in her face. "Valerius, could we not just walk? For a moment? In the upper gallery where it's quiet. No one would have to see. I just want to see it with you, not through a window." The final words came out with more of a plea than she intended. For 6 months, her world had been framed by windows. The courtyard, the gardens, the city beyond the walls, all of it a beautiful tapestry she could see but never touch. He looked at her, and the expression on his face was one of profound, aching tenderness. He reached out, his cool hand cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. "Mia," he said, and her name was a sigh. "You know I cannot." "Why?" Question was quiet, but it was not yielding. "For your safety. Always for that." His voice was a velvet chain, each word a link forged of unimpeachable logic and love. "This court is ancient, and its rules are unforgiving. Its players are ruthless. A human companion, they would see you as a vulnerability, a weapon to be used against me. Or they would see you as an insult to the ancient bloodlines. Either way, they would seek to remove you. I will not allow that. I will not risk you." Every word was reasonable. Every word was a lie. Not a factual lie. The court was undoubtedly dangerous. But it was an emotional lie, a grand and terrible misdirection. He spoke of her safety, but what she heard was her shame. He spoke of protecting her, but what she felt was the cold, hard reality of being hidden, of being his flaw, his weakness, his dirty little secret. A chasm opened between them right there in the warm, firelit intimacy of the bed. "I see," she said. The fire in her had not been extinguished. It had simply been banked, its glow turning from hopeful warmth to a hard, hot coal of resolve. He didn't seem to notice the shift. He reached for her again, to pull her back into the circle of his arms, back into the safety of their secret world. "Come here," he murmured, his voice laced with the gentle command she had always found so seductive. But for the first time, she resisted. She stayed where she was, just out of his reach. The firelight flickered, and in that brief, stuttering light, she saw the vast, lonely splendor of the room, the towering bookshelves, the heavy tapestries, the gilded ceiling high above. It was a beautiful cage, and she was finally, truly, beginning to see the bars. The days that followed his refusal were a study in loneliness. Mia's world, once a secret, magical pocket within the palace, now felt like a prison constructed of the finest materials. She had a small staff, 3 servants sworn to the king's highest confidence. Young Lyra, who brought her meals, her eyes always fixed on a point just past Mia's shoulder, as if acknowledging her directly would be a breach of protocol. Thomas, the old man who tended her fireplace and never spoke a single word. And then there was Anya, the head housekeeper of the royal wing, a woman whose face was a mask of stern efficiency. It was Anya who managed the delicate logistics of Mia's invisibility, who ensured the corridors were empty when Mia moved between rooms. It was Anya whose gaze, unlike the others, sometimes snagged on Mia's for a brief, sharp moment, holding an emotion too complex to be named. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to recognition, a weary acknowledgement of a story she had seen play out before. This morning, Anya was supervising Lyra as she changed the linens. Mia stood by the window, watching the flurry of activity in the main courtyard. Ladies of the court, dressed in jewel-toned velvets, were strolling in small, laughing groups. They were alive, they were visible. They were part of the world. "The fabrics from the southern territories have arrived, my lady," Anya said. She rarely used the honorific, and when she did, it felt deliberate, a small, sharp jab. "The king thought you might wish to have a new gown made." A new gown? For what? To wear while she sat alone in her rooms? To grace the king's bedchamber, the only place she was ever truly seen? The offer now felt like a gilded chain, another beautiful thing to decorate the cage. After the servants departed, Mia was left alone with the shimmering bolt of sapphire silk. She draped it over her shoulders and walked to the tall mirror. The woman who looked back at her was a stranger. Her face was pale, her eyes large and shadowed. She thought of Valerius's reasons, his careful, loving explanations of the danger. Was he protecting her, or was he protecting himself? "A love that requires you to be invisible," a voice in her head whispered, "is not love, it is ownership." The thought was so sharp, so brutal, it made her flinch. She loved the quiet intensity of his gaze, the way he would read ancient poetry to her by the fire, his voice a low cadence that made the old words live and breathe. She loved the way he would stand by the window in the deep hours before dawn, utterly motionless, watching the world with eyes that held the weight of centuries, and how his face would soften when she called his name. But was that enough? To be cherished in the dark and erased in the light? The shame of it was a slow-acting poison. She let the silk slide from her shoulders. She looked past her own reflection, at the opulent room behind her, at the bars of her gilded cage. The decision wasn't made in a flash of anger, but in the cold, quiet certainty that rose within her now. She could not live like this. She would not. The only question was what she was willing to risk to change it. The answer was everything. The great council chamber was cold, a vast cavern of carved stone and shadowed arches. Valerius sat on the obsidian throne, a seat of power carved from a single, massive block of volcanic glass that drank the light and gave nothing back. He rested his chin on his fist, his expression a mask of regal boredom as Duke Vorlag spoke. The Duke was a creature of the old guard, a vampire whose bloodline was nearly as ancient as Valerius's own. Tall and gaunt, with a face like a handsome hawk, and his ambition was a palpable force in the room. "The trade agreements your majesty has forged, while profitable, have emboldened the mortal kingdoms," Vorlag was saying, his voice measured, building his case. "They no longer fear us as they once did. We should be expanding our territory, not retreating into commerce." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "There are even whispers, Your Majesty, disturbing whispers of certain personal compromises within these very walls. Servants speak in hushed tones of strange requests, human meals ordered to sealed wings. The scent of mortal soap where no mortals should be. These are but shadows and rumors, of course, but in my experience, where there is smoke, there is often fire. The silence that followed was absolute. This was the attack he had been anticipating. This was the viper's nest he had described to Mia. He thought of her face when she had asked to walk in the gardens, the open, earnest hope in her eyes, the crushing weight of his refusal. He had done it to prevent this very scene, to keep her name from ever being spoken in this venomous room. The king's private affairs are precisely that. Private, Valerius said, his tone lethally calm. If servants gossip, perhaps they should concern themselves more with their discretion and less with matters above their station. Vorlag's lips curved into a thin smile. Of course, Your Majesty. However, there is a distinction between political expedience and personal entanglement. The old laws exist for a reason. They protect us from weakness, from the decay that inevitably follows when we bind ourselves too closely to creatures who age and die, while we remain unchanged. Valerius felt the trap closing. Vorlag was planting seeds, forcing him to either confirm the rumors or appear evasive. Your concern for the stability of my throne is noted, Valerius said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. As is your apparent belief that you are qualified to lecture me on the requirements of my office. I have held this throne for 600 years. You would do well to remember that when next you question my judgment. The rebuke was sharp enough to draw a collective intake of breath from the assembled lords. Vorlag bowed, the gesture dripping with false humility, and returned to his seat, his defeat temporary, but his resentment permanent. When he was alone, the silence of the vast chamber descended upon Valerius. The obsidian throne felt impossibly cold beneath him. For centuries, this loneliness had been his companion, a familiar weight he carried with the crown. Then Mia had come into his life, a candle flame in the endless dark. Her warmth, her vibrancy, her infuriating, beautiful mortality. And he was killing her. Not her body, but her spirit. He was keeping her in the dark to protect her, but in doing so, he was turning her into a ghost. The memory rose then, sharp and visceral. Chaol. His friend, his companion, from centuries ago when Valerius was newly crowned. Chaol had been mortal, a scholar whose brilliance had been matched only by his kindness. Valerius had not hidden him. He had been young enough, foolish enough, to believe his authority would be enough to protect what he cherished. His enemies had taken Chaol. They had kept him for 3 nights, and what they had done to him had turned a vibrant man into a broken shell. They had returned him to the palace gates, still alive but shattered. Valerius had held him as he died. Chaol's last words had been an apology. That memory had dictated every choice since. And now he was, repeating the pattern, trapping Mia in the same shadows, making her vulnerable through isolation. He was trapped in a cycle of his own making, unable to protect and unable to let go. The announcement came 3 weeks later. It was the centenary of his coronation. The palace would host a grand convocation, a formal ceremony where every noble would gather to renew their oaths to the crown. It was to be the most important political event of the decade. For Mia, it was a deadline. She read the proclamation and a sense of cold, terrifying purpose settled over her. She would not spend that night waiting in the shadows. She would be there. She would make herself seen. For the next 2 weeks, Mia began to prepare. She asked Anya careful questions about the palace layout, about the ceremony schedule, framing them as idle curiosity. Anya answered with careful precision, But her gaze lingered on Mia more often, assessing, weighing. One afternoon, Mia found Anya alone in the royal linen closet. "I need to ask you something," Mia said. "Something that may anger you." Anya turned her cool gaze on Mia. "If it concerns the king's affairs, I am bound by my oath." "It concerns my affairs," Mia said quietly. "You have served the royal household for how many years?" 32, Anya replied. "Then you have seen others like me, women kept in the shadows. What happened to them, Anya?" The silence stretched. Then Anya turned away, her hands moving mechanically to refold a sheet. "They faded," she said finally. "Some were sent away. Some took their own path into darkness. One tried to make herself known to the court. She was found 3 nights later in the lower city, drained and discarded. A message from those who could not touch the king directly." Mia felt ice water run through her veins. "And you have watched this happen, over and over, and done nothing?" Anya turned back, real emotion cracking through that stern mask. "I am a servant, my lady. That is my duty. That is my survival. Do not mistake my complicity for approval." "Then help me change it," Mia said urgently. "The centenary convocation. I need to be there. Visible, present, undeniable." Anya stared at her, shock dawning in her eyes. "You cannot be serious. They will destroy you." "I am already dying here, Anya, just more slowly." Anya was silent for a long time, fighting a battle between loyalty and rebellion. Finally, she let out a long breath. The musicians arrived 2 hours before the ceremony through the Western Service entrance. The guards check instruments, but not against a written list. "The music master owes me a debt, a blood debt." 5 years ago, his youngest son was involved in the death of a mortal servant, an accident during a feeding, but a violation of the king's treaty nonetheless. The penalty was execution. I discovered it before anyone else, disposed of the evidence, and provided an alternative explanation. His son lives because of my silence. He understands that silence can be revoked. He will agree to be momentarily distracted while his ensemble gathers. Mia felt hope surge, mixed with the cold understanding of what Anya was revealing. Anya walked to a cabinet and pulled out a velvet box. Inside was a pearl necklace, simple, elegant, clearly valuable. "These belonged to my grandmother," Anya said, her voice rough. "She was a companion to the old king's brother. She lived and died in the shadows of this palace. She was never acknowledged. She died alone in a cottage in the countryside, still wearing his ring on a chain, still believing he had loved her." Anya lifted the pearls. "She would have wanted you to wear them. They will mark you as someone of consequence." As Anya placed the pearls in her hand, Mia felt the reality of her decision solidify. "When is the precise moment to reveal myself?" Anya nodded. "After the herald reads the proclamation, there is a ceremonial silence, perhaps 90 seconds. That is when all eyes are on the throne. That is your window." Over the next days, Anya procured musicians' blacks, an old violin case, and drew Mia a map of the route. She approached the music master, calling in her debt. The day of the centenary convocation dawned gray and heavy. Valerius stood motionless in his dressing chamber, while valets dressed him in the full regalia of his office. The midnight blue tunic, the ceremonial armor of polished black steel, each piece a weight, a responsibility. His thoughts were with Mia. She had been a ghost to him for weeks, a polite and distant stranger. He knew he was losing her to his own fear. He'd almost gone to her last night, desperate to tell her he would find a way. But then the memory of Kale had risen, sharp as a blade. The torture, the death, the terrible lesson. Anything he loved could be destroyed. One of the valets approached, bearing the crown. As the cold weight settled on his brow, his gaze drifted to the window. He saw the courtyard filling with dark carriages. He saw Vorlag's carriage, his banner snapping in the wind. He braced himself for a confrontation, for a challenge to his authority. He had no idea that the true challenge was not a duke in the courtyard, but a woman preparing to step out of the shadows and set the world on fire. The western service entrance was rough stone and iron. Mia stood in the shadows, heart hammering, watching musicians arrive. She wore the musicians' blacks, hood up, the violin case light in her hand. Anya appeared, passing close enough to murmur, 3 minutes from now, do not hesitate. Then she was gone. Mia counted the seconds. She watched as the music master called the string section for inspection. The guards at the door watched the street, bored. This was it. Mia stepped out and walked toward the entrance with confident strides. She reached the doorway and stepped inside, nodding to the guard. He barely glanced at her. She placed her case with the others and joined the back of the group. The music master gestured. Form, up. Perfect discipline. The king's eyes will be upon us. The musicians processed through corridors that gradually became more ornate. They climbed a spiral staircase. Mia's legs felt weak, but she kept moving. They emerged into the high gallery overlooking the great hall. Mia moved to the very back and finally looked down. The great hall was a cathedral of power. Hundreds of vampires stood in a semicircle before the empty obsidian throne, their faces pale and perfect, their eyes cold and watchful. Light from 1,000 candles glittered on jewels and armor, yet the hall felt dark. Mia saw Duke Vorlag near the front, Lady Isolde scanning the assembly. These were the Vipers. The ceremonial horns sounded. The assembly fell silent. The great doors opened and Valerius entered. He was magnificent, terrible. Dressed in black and silver with the iron crown on his head, he moved with the absolute certainty of a being who had ruled for 6 centuries. For a terrifying moment, Mia's resolve wavered, but then she remembered the slow death of living in shadows. She remembered that love without acknowledgement was not love at all. Valerius seated himself on the throne. The herald stepped forward and read the proclamation, his voice ringing clear. Let all here assembled bear witness to the continuity of our eternal reign, to the strength of our eternal ways, to the purity of our eternal blood. When he finished, the ceremonial silence descended. Every eye was on the king. This was Mia's window. Her hands shook as she pushed back her hood and clasped the pearls around her neck. She stepped out from behind the pillar and moved to the balustrade. She placed her hands on the cold stone and stood in the open. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a vampire in the middle rows glanced up. He froze. He nudged his companion. Another head turned. A murmur started, spreading through the hall like a ripple. Heads began to turn. The smooth silence of the ceremony shattered. The murmur grew into a wave of whispers. Who was she? A human? Here? Duke Vorlag turned. When he saw Mia, his eyes widened for a fraction of a second. Then his lips parted in a slow, cruel smile of vindication. The rumors were true. The smoke had led to fire. On the throne, Valerius felt the change before he understood its cause. He lifted his head, searching for the source of the disturbance. And then he saw her. Mia. Standing in the gallery, wearing pearls, her face pale but resolute. She was looking right at him. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, he could not think. There was only shock, fury, and beneath it all, a tidal wave of fear. Everything he had worked to prevent had just been called down upon her head by her own hand. Across the hall, their eyes locked. Her gaze was a plea. See me. In his, she saw the cataclysm, the breaking of a king. The silence was a held breath. Every eye was on Mia or on Valerius. Duke Vorlag stepped forward, his voice ringing with malicious pleasure. It seems, Your Majesty. The rumors were not mere gossip after all. The smoke has revealed the fire. A human. In these hallowed halls, on this most sacred of days, an insult to us all. A growl of agreement rumbled through the court. This was the moment of rupture. For a terrible second, Valerius did nothing. Then he moved. A subtle gesture, a slight inclination of his head toward the captain of his royal guard. It was an order, silent and absolute. 2 guards began moving toward the gallery staircase. Panic seized Mia. They were coming for her. She had gambled everything and lost. From the throne, Valerius watched the guards advance. He watched the terror bloom on Mia's face. He was furious at her recklessness, but he was more furious with himself. He saw it all with blinding clarity now. He had thought he was protecting a flame from the wind, when he should have been building a hearth where it could burn brightly. The guards reached the gallery and flanked her protectively. The captain stopped before her and gave a formal bow. His voice carried down into the silent hall. "My lady," he said, "the king has concerns for your safety in this crowd. He requests that you be escorted to a secure location until the ceremony concludes." "My lady," the words echoed. It was an acknowledgement, a claim. It positioned her not as an intruder, but as someone under the king's personal protection. Vorlag's triumphant smile faltered, confusion replacing vindication. He had been outmaneuvered. "Escort the lady to the royal wing," Valerius's voice boomed. "Post a guard at her door. She is under my personal protection." Mia was guided away, her eyes meeting Valerius's one last time. The fury was still there, but beneath it was a grim promise. This is not over. She left behind a court in chaos and a king who now had to face the storm she had unleashed. The fire in her chambers crackled. Mia paced, no longer in musician's blacks, but in a simple gray gown. The guards were posted outside her door now, visible, a public declaration. She was no longer invisible. But what had the cost been? The hidden panel slid open and Valerius swept in. He was no longer wearing the crown or armor, but he radiated cold, controlled fury. The air grew heavy. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" His voice was dangerously quiet. Mia faced him, her fear a cold knot, but she would not let it rule her. "I have made myself visible, something you refuse to do. You have made yourself a target. You stood in front of my entire court, in front of men who would flay you for sport, and you painted a target on your own back." "I have been a target since the first night," she shot back. "A secret target, a hidden weakness. You speak of your court as a viper's nest. Did you think I was safer not knowing where the vipers were? Did you think your protection was anything other than a beautifully decorated cage? My protection is the only reason you are still breathing," he roared, his control snapping. He crossed the space in 2 strides. "I have spent 6 months weaving a web of secrecy around you, and you, in one act of reckless pride, have torn it all to shreds. This wasn't about pride, this was about survival. Do you have any idea what it is like to be erased? To live in the margins of someone else's life? To feel yourself fading day by day until you look in a mirror and see nothing but the room behind you?" Her voice broke, the raw pain pouring out. His anger faltered. He had never considered it from her perspective. "I did it to keep you safe," he said, his voice dropping. "I did it because I will not lose you. You were losing me anyway, Valerius. You were losing me to the silence, to the shadows. I would rather face Duke Vorlog in the light than die a ghost in your bedchamber." The raw honesty struck him like a blow. He stared at her, at the tears, at the defiant terror. The last of his fury dissolved, leaving behind the raw, ancient fear. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice ragged. He looked away toward the fire. "Before I was king, I had a friend, Kale. My rivals couldn't touch me directly, so they went for him. I didn't hide him. I thought my authority was enough. I was wrong. They took him. They kept him for 3 nights. They wanted to prove that anything I loved, they could unmake. And they did." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I found what was left of him at the palace gates. He was still alive, barely. I held him as he died. His last words were an apology, as if his torture was his failing and not my failure to protect him. When I look at you, when I see their eyes on you, I see him. I see them unmaking you, and I cannot survive that again. The confession hung in the air, devastating in its vulnerability. This was about trauma, a wound so deep it had dictated his every action. Mia's anger evaporated, replaced by profound empathy. She finally understood. She closed the distance and touched his arm. You aren't protecting me, Valerius. You're hiding with me. From a ghost. From a memory. He flinched but didn't pull away. I am not Kale, and I am not a fragile thing to be hidden in a box. Your fear is real. The danger is real. But we cannot let the past hold our future hostage. You cannot honor his memory by turning me into a ghost. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. The understanding in her eyes was not pity, but shared recognition of pain. Slowly, he lifted his hand and covered hers. His touch was not possessive, but desperate, seeking. I executed them, he said quietly. All of them. I thought it would make the pain stop. It didn't. It just made me more afraid. So I stopped loving. For 400 years, I stopped. Until you. Then don't stop now, she said fiercely. Don't let them win twice. I'm not asking you to be reckless. I'm asking you to be brave enough to let me stand beside you, not behind you. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. His body was cold, and still, no heartbeat, no breath. But his arms were solid and real. If they hurt you, he said into her hair, if they take you from me, I will burn this kingdom to ashes. Then don't give them the chance, she murmured. Stand with me, publicly. Fight with me, not for me. He pulled back to look at her face. You understand what this will mean? The battle we're about to fight? Vorlag will not let this stand. There will be political maneuvering, assassination attempts, perhaps rebellion. I know, she said simply. But I would rather fight beside you and risk death than live safely as your secret. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You are either the bravest woman I have ever met, or the most foolish. Perhaps both, she said. Can you live with that? He leaned his forehead against hers. I don't have a choice anymore. You've seen to that. They stood together in the firelight, no longer separated by secrets, but bound by shared, terrifying resolve. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, they were on the same side. The next 2 weeks were a political whirlwind. Valerius made strategic moves that positioned Mia as a fixture in the palace. The guards remained posted. He ordered her apartments expanded and refurnished. He arranged for her to have a human lady's maid. Most significantly, he began including her in advisory meetings on matters of trade and mortal relations. If they are going to whisper that I am compromised by mortal influence, he told Mia, then I will demonstrate that mortal insight is an asset, not a weakness. He was building a narrative that would make her presence not just acceptable, but valuable. Vorlag called for a formal council session to address the matter of the king's companion. As the date approached, Valerius became increasingly tense. He will invoke the old laws, Valerius said, pacing, the laws that forbid the king from binding himself to a mortal. They were written after a vampire king took a human queen and turned her, and she went mad from the transformation, slaughtering entire villages. Can you challenge them? Mia asked. Valerius's jaw tightened. The council is not merely advisory. Each duke commands his own territory, his own forces. I am the strongest among them, but I am not invincible. If I openly defy the old laws without building consensus, Vorlag could call it tyranny. He could rally the other dukes, frame me as a mad king who has abandoned tradition. That could fracture the kingdom into civil war. I need to be smarter than that. I need to change the law, not break it. Then rewrite the laws, Mia said quietly. He stared at her. The old laws have not been amended in 500 years. Then perhaps it's time. You told me yourself that your reign has been built on adaptation. Argue that the laws were written for a different age. Show them that I am not a threat, but an asset. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. You're suggesting I use the council's own fears against them. Show them that isolationism is the real threat. Over the next days, Valerius worked constantly, reaching out to allies, calling in favors. Lord Oren, his oldest friend, was brought into the inner circle. You will need at least 3 of the 7 dukes on your side, Oren said. Lady Isolde will side with whoever she believes will win. Duke Marin fears change, but he fears instability more. Frame this as preventing rebellion. Duke Theron cares only for strength. Show strength, not hesitation. The night before the council session, Mia said, I want to be there. In the council chamber? Yes. If they are going to debate my fate, I should be present. He studied her, then nodded slowly. Very well. But you will not speak unless I give you leave. If you speak out of turn, it will give them ammunition. The day arrived. The 7 dukes were present. Valerius entered first, taking his seat on the obsidian throne. Then Mia entered, escorted by the captain. She was dressed in deep emerald, wearing Anya's grandmother's pearls. The room fell silent as she walked the length of the chamber. Valerius had arranged a chair on the dais, 1 step below the throne. Mia sat, her face calm. Duke Vorlag spoke first. Your Majesty, the presence of this mortal woman in the council chamber is highly irregular. Her presence is by my command, Valerius replied coldly. This council is convened to discuss matters concerning her. It is only fitting that she be present. Vorlag's jaw tightened. Very well. The old laws are explicit. The king may not take a mortal consort, nor may he maintain a mortal as a companion of the heart, nor may he transform a mortal for the purpose of taking them as consort thereafter. The law was written precisely to close such loopholes. King Aldric attempted this very thing, keeping his mortal hidden, then transforming her and claiming the transformation was unrelated to any union. The council of that age saw through the deception. The laws were strengthened. The intent is clear. No entanglement between the throne and mortal weakness in any form. His mortal queen, once turned, descended into madness and slaughtered hundreds before she was destroyed. The laws exist to prevent such catastrophe. I am familiar with the history, Duke, Valerius said, and I am not proposing to violate the laws as they stand. Vorlag looked thrown. Then you agree to send her away? No, Valerius said. I am proposing to amend the laws, to recognize that they were written for a different age, an age of fear and isolation. Our world has changed. The mortal kingdoms are no longer scattered tribes. They are nations with armies, technologies, and trade networks. It is time the laws concerning royal companionship adapted as well. You cannot simply rewrite the old laws because they are inconvenient, Vorlag shot back. Then what purpose does this council serve? Valerius countered. If the laws cannot be questioned or revised, then we are a priesthood worshipping the words of the dead. Lord Oren spoke. Your Majesty, what specific amendment do you propose? Valerius produced a scroll and read. The king may take as consort any individual, mortal or immortal, whose character and loyalty have been proven. Such a consort may, with the consent of the council, be granted the transformation to immortality after a period of no less than 5 years, during which time their fitness may be observed and judged. He paused, then continued, his voice taking on a more measured, scholarly tone. I must address the concern that inevitably arises, the madness of Queen Aldara. But let us examine that tragedy with clear eyes. Queen Aldara was transformed within weeks of meeting King Aldric. She had no preparation, no understanding of what she would become. The transformation was forced upon her in haste, driven by the king's obsession rather than her informed choice. Modern scholarship, including the work of our own court physicians, suggests that such rushed transformations create severe psychological fracture. The human mind, given no time to comprehend or accept the fundamental change to its nature, splinters. However, gradual mental preparation, knowing what to expect, choosing it freely, having years to understand the reality of immortality, this significantly reduces the risk. 5 years provides that preparation. 5 years allows for true informed consent, not a hasty decision made in the passion of new love. The chamber erupted in arguments. 5 years is nothing, Vorlag scoffed. 5 years is enough time to prove loyalty and character, Valerius replied. It is enough time for this council to observe, to judge, to raise objections if warranted. And it is enough time for the mortal to understand the weight of what they are choosing. It is a safeguard, Duke, not recklessness. And what of the bloodline? Another Duke interjected. What of the purity of the royal line? The royal line is not diluted by the consort, only by the heir, Valerius said. And there are no heirs. There have not been heirs to the Valerian throne in 7 centuries. This argument is a distraction from the real issue. And what is the real issue? Vorlag demanded. Valerius stood, his presence dominating the chamber. The real issue is whether this kingdom will be ruled by the living or by the ghosts of the past. Whether we will adapt to the world as it is or cling to traditions that no longer serve us. I have brought this kingdom prosperity, security, and peace. I have done so by engaging with the mortal world, by forging alliances and trade agreements, by recognizing that our survival depends on adaptation. This amendment is consistent with that philosophy. Lady Isolde spoke. Your Majesty, if after 5 years this council were to deem your companion unfit for transformation, would you abide by that judgment? It was a trap. Valerius met her gaze without flinching. I would abide by the judgment of this council if made in good faith, based on observable evidence of unfitness. If made in bad faith, as a political maneuver, I would not. This council exists because we are strongest when united. 7 territories, 7 bloodlines, bound by mutual respect and shared law. But make no mistake, I am still the king. My authority is first among equals, not subject to equals. Lady Isolde's lips curved in a small smile. She respected the parry. Duke Marin cleared his throat. Your Majesty, I am troubled. I fear the unrest it may cause. Then let them see it, Valerius said. I have given 600 years to this throne. I have sacrificed more than any of you can comprehend, and I will not sacrifice this. He gestured to Mia. Not to appease those who would rather see this kingdom stagnate than evolve. The chamber fell silent. Finally, Lord Oren spoke. I support the king's amendment. I vote in favor. Lady Isolde studied Valerius. I support the amendment. The king has proven his wisdom. Duke Marin hesitated. I support it, reluctantly, but I will expect this council to take its role seriously. That was 3 votes. Duke Theron leaned forward. I care nothing for your laws. I care about strength. You have shown strength today, King Valerius. You have stated your will and dared us to challenge it. That is the mark of a king. I support the amendment. 4 votes. It was done. Vorlag's face was a mask of rage. This is a farce. This council has chosen to support their king, Valerius corrected. The amendment is passed. This session is concluded. They descended from the dais together. Later that night, Mia and Valerius stood on the balcony of her chambers. The rain had passed, and the air was clean and cold. The city below glittered under a sky full of stars. 5 years, Mia said softly. That's what we have. 5 years, Valerius agreed. And then, if you still wish it, if the council does not object, I will offer you the transformation. You will become immortal. You will stand beside me, not for a mortal lifetime, but for eternity. Mia had thought about this. The idea of becoming a vampire was terrifying. But the idea of aging and dying while he remained unchanged, of leaving him alone after they had fought so hard to be together, was worse. I will take the transformation, she said. When the time comes, I want forever with you, Valerius. Not just the brief flicker of a human life. He pulled her close. Forever is a long time. She laughed softly. I doubt that. But we have 5 years to find out. They stood together in the starlight, no longer hidden in shadows but acknowledged in the light. The danger was not gone. Vorlag would plot. The old guard would resist. There would be attempts on her life, political machinations, whispers and schemes. But they would face it together, as partners. The secret was no longer a cage. It was a promise, spoken aloud and witnessed. In 5 years, if they survived, Mia would be transformed. She would become one of them, eternal and unchanging. She would stand beside Valerius not as a mortal curiosity, but as his consort, his equal, bound to him not by secrecy, but by choice. The future stretched before them, uncertain and dangerous, and full of possibility. But for the first time, it was a future they would face together, hand in hand, in the full light of day. And that, Mia thought as she stood in the circle of his arms, was worth every risk she had taken.